You're listening to the audio portion of Workshop Wednesdays. Workshop Wednesdays is a free live discussion about topics affecting accountants, bookkeepers, and business owners. You can join the ABO group in Facebook to participate live Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Just search for ABBO in Facebook. This podcast is brought to you by Schoolofbookkeeping.com, where you will learn, grow, and build a thriving bookkeeping practice. We have hundreds of lessons with almost every aspect of the industry. Start your free month today at Schoolofbookkeeping.com. Oh, welcome to another Workshop Wednesday brought to you by Schoolofbookkeeping.com, where it's casual conversations for serious workflows and where you can learn QuickBooks your way. Hi, Rachel. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
All right. It seems like we just did this like yesterday. Rachel filled in for Matthew, who filled in for Rachel in the workshop. So it's like
we trade.
It was like a substitute swap.
If only I could swap places with him in Ventura, California. That would be better.
Right?
He can come here to rainy
right
Michigan.
At home. Oh, it's rainy there. That lake effect? No.
No, it is a lake effect. In the summertime, it rains all summer. It's crazy. I would not want to stay here forever.
All right. If you have a new location for Rachel, she's open for discussion. All right. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the updates to the desktop migration. We did a workshop a long time ago, and I'll actually share my screen in a second there. And it was a workshop that I was forced to do by myself. So I really have been wanting to update this anyway, because I hate when I have to do a workshop when nobody's there to bounce off things.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of changes anyway. You're so good at migrations that every little detail.
Yeah, now we were talking yesterday on the QB Power Hour. You started with QuickBooks Desktop in your QuickBooks journey, and then just immediately said, no, I don't want any of this, and I moved to QuickBooks Online.
No, in the early 2000s, I used QuickBooks Student Edition, but it's really when I came back to QuickBooks about 5 years ago, and I completely started with QuickBooks Desktop. But I didn't know anything about QuickBooks Online, and when I discovered QuickBooks Online, I realized it had a little bit more cloud flexibility for me. But I do love QuickBooks Desktop. It just doesn't really work for my business, but as a software, I love it.
Yeah, it's definitely got. We've talked about this. I've got a blog article about QuickBooks Desktop as a dog, QuickBooks Online as a cat, right? If you're a dog lover, totally you don't really like cats. If you're a cat lover, you don't really like dogs. And if you're an animal lover, it really doesn't matter. So, but like a dog, you can teach QuickBooks tricks and how to fetch. And
yes, a little bit more, good dog.
You're a little bit more able to do some magic there, whereas a cat just enjoys your company occasionally, or points to the bottom of the empty food bowl.
Yeah. Things. And like we were saying yesterday, I mean, QuickBooks Desktop, it's so robust, and you can do everything you need to in your business in QuickBooks Desktop, Enterprise especially. Yeah. But QuickBooks Online is really more geared to it with other apps that you're doing a lot of the stuff elsewhere and feeding the financial data back to QuickBooks. They're just two different things.
Yeah, it's apples and oranges, as the case may be. Now, there are a lot of trigger events as of late causing people to reevaluate whether it's a good time to move. The biggest lever that Intuit is pulling is pricing, especially with the model of QuickBooks licensing desktop, right? You can have as many QuickBooks company files as you want. So a lot of companies that have multiple entities are finding that pricing being a barrier, because QuickBooks Online is per a company file or a company subscription per entity. So that makes it a little bit challenging to swallow the cost of doing a subscription for each of those companies. So they're trying all sorts of things with
Yeah.
multi-company discounts and those types and promotions. QuickBooks Ledger is a great option for accounting professionals who have clients with multiple entities that are low,
Yeah.
basically straight up clients. So there's all sorts of different things out there that QuickBooks is using to encourage
Yeah.
move to the cloud, but it doesn't come without its issues. There's often some surprises when it comes to workflows or feature sets or navigation is a huge is a
Yeah.
huge challenge for the learning curve. If you look at the marketing that's out there, it's seamless, right?
Oh, you hate that word.
Seamless migration.
Once you
And,
spend hours calibrating it, setting it up, making sure everything is correct, then it's seamless.
exactly. So just because they have the word QuickBooks in front of them doesn't mean that it's apples and apples, right? It is apples and oranges. There are workflows that are built in between both of those applications that should work, right? It should transition is the name, is a word I'm trying to search for, but it doesn't always pan out that way. So
Yeah, and actually,
we
I have
have
a couple. When you get to that, I have a couple questions for you because I'm actually working with a client right now that you actually did the migration for me, and there's a few other things that I'm curious to know if it comes over from QuickBooks Desktop to QBO, and I've learned so much more about what comes over, but I still don't know it all. So
yeah
when we get there, I have to ask you.
and that's part of the challenge is understanding, right, what will and what won't make the journey. And Howard, who's watching us on Facebook, is like QuickBooks Desktop has a lot more features than QBO without having to pay the extra fees. That is the way it sits currently, and I fully expect Intuit's terms and conditions to change to to
Yeah,
cause, right.
I'm
We
sure they
talked about
will.
that.
I'm sure they will. And then also, for me, it's gotten to the point where a factor is also how long have you been on QuickBooks Desktop? Because I think that staying with QuickBooks Desktop comes into play more if they've got a lot of years of history in there.
Oh, yeah.
Or if somebody is new
Yeah.
to the QuickBooks world and they're like, what should I get, desktop or online? For me, the obvious answer is online. I wouldn't start a new desktop file. But the issue is more when you've got some businesses that have been in there for a while and they've got all this stuff, it becomes, do I bring it all over or do I just start a new thing? Or there's so many different questions to ask.
And that's a great segue, right? Because the size limitation was always a consideration, a key factor or consideration of when you're talking with your customer about, is it time to move? Because if they've been using QuickBooks Desktop for decades or several years at least, they could potentially have a lot of data to transfer. And originally, I'm trying to go back in the Wayback Machine, I think it was 100 megabytes was the file size. That was the limitation of moving. And then they transitioned to this limitation of targets, which was a factor. And it was, I think it was, I don't know the specific numbers. I think it was like 150,000 was the original one. And then they bumped it up to 350,000. And then it went to 750,000. And as of February, as of today, which I noticed it in February, it might have been prior to that, it's now 1.2 million
Oh my
is the
goodness.
limitation of the
Yeah.
number of targets. Now, that segues nicely into the question of what in the world is a target. And the simplest way, without getting too lost in the weeds here, a target is the number of references to line items on a transaction, right? If you have an invoice with 5 line items on it, that's 6 targets, because the header information of the transaction, which is called the source, is also a target, but is one target, and then the line item details are
Each a target.
Each one is a target, right?
Okay.
It's not a transaction limit, right? Because if you have one transaction with 400 line items on it, that's a lot more information than a transaction with one.
Yeah.
So that is the indicator of how much information can transfer over, but that doesn't equate to years or number of transactions or anything like that. So
that could only be maybe 1 year of a complex company. And then, so you could bring over targets, but there's a lot of other things you can't bring over. Attachments.
Exactly. So so initially that was the part of the discussion, is and typically part of the engagement when you're moving companies over from desktop to online is, okay, we have to clean up this information first, or trim it off, or choose a starting point, because the migration tool didn't give you the ability to bring over all the information if you wanted to, right? So now that conversation doesn't have to be part of the conversation, because with a limitation of 1.2 million targets, there's a lot of data that can now come over, right? Should you? That's a question. That's another conversation. Right? Can you? Yes. I tend to take the mindset of, let's just see, right? Because we don't know what we don't know until we try.
Yeah.
And rather than combing through somebody's desktop data and checking all the preferences and the settings and those types of things, let's just see this is my way to approach things. Let's just see if that data converts as it is, and evaluate the difference between the desktop and the online using an import summary that QuickBooks makes available, right?
Yeah.
That's my approach. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the best approach, but typically, like the projects that I've been working on with you, Rachel, I don't know anything about these customers, right? So I don't have any prior working knowledge of their QuickBooks desktop files. So that seems to what works best for me going about this. If this is a client of yours and you have some history, working knowledge of them, and hey, this desktop data prior to me getting involved is garbage and we don't want that, then you already have can have that conversation with your client. We're gonna purge it off.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I'm the same way. If I know that it's garbage, I don't want to bring over the history. In this situation, their data seemed to be fairly accurate, but it was a lot of it. So we really just wanted to bring starting balances.
Yeah. So in School of Bookkeeping, we have, what I'm trying to do there is, give people a choice of choosing their own adventure, right? Because there's a lot of resources that are out on Intuit's website, Intuit's articles and whatnot, but they are constantly changing. And sometimes it's hard to find some of these resources. So I'm trying to compile all of the useful resources and articles and put them in one place so that people can have a one-stop shop when it comes to, all right, if I want to do this myself, let's go ahead and use this as our guidance. Or if you're if you've never touched QuickBooks Desktop and you don't want to, then you have an option there. Or if you've already converted the company file and have some questions about it, you have some resources and options there as well. So let me share my screen here. So this is our course that we have of just converting QuickBooks Desktop to online. See, there's the old workshop that I did by myself, just staring into the abyss and going through this. But I've broken it down into migration best practices, which is what I just talked about there, and then specific inventory or specific QuickBooks workflows that you want to have a conversation about, especially with your clients. The inventory considerations, we had talked about that on a workshop. I added that as a course content. What about payroll? What happens with payroll when that comes over from desktop to online? Maybe payments, right? Or whether I should convert or not. Talking about the file size limitations that we had just mentioned. What data converts as far as the terminology or the features or the preferences or transactions and items. So all of that information now is in one place, so you don't have to go hunting for all of those things. Rachel, is this a good place to ask your question about what does and what doesn't come over?
Yeah, I was curious. Yeah, so I know that my thought escaped my head, but I was more curious to know about the things you set up in QuickBooks Desktop, like memorize transactions or recurring transactions or things like that. Does any of that stuff come over?
Yeah. So this would be the place to go to do that. Yes, this is the course. So like you would go in here and see the items from desktop. How do they come over?
Oh, okay.
Right? So,
oh gosh,
so
that course is awesome. Yeah, it's got everything.
What moves to QuickBooks Online, assemblies, how they come over. Now, you were asking about memorized transactions.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be probably down here in transactions. Oh, those are reimbursables. And I believe we have a search function here. Do we? Let's see. There is a search for something. Recurring. We'll just look at that. Oh, if I could type in there. There it is. It's in lists.
Ooh.
Nope. Is it? Scheduled.
It should be in lists.
Yeah. Recurring transactions in QuickBooks Online. Yes. They do come over, but they aren't scheduled. So that's what it boils down to. Is
yeah. You can go in then and set the schedule.
Exactly. And the reason behind that is, especially if you have recurring transactions tied to an automatic payment, you wouldn't want them to come over and schedule again and run again if you haven't completed all of those processes.
Right.
It's kind of a cart before the horse type of thing. But yes, this is the course that we have that's available. Anyone who's that goes with the premium for accountants, there is a 30-day trial, and you can put that QR code up there for the free 30-day trial, because you can access this course for 30 days before you even pay for our membership options. So you have that as an option here. So let me go back to what I was doing here. There we go. So we've got whether or not to convert, because this is a conversation that you want to have with your client if you don't know as what's going to happen to that data. Or this could be also a really good resource after the conversion happens to understand why certain data didn't come over the way you had expected.
Yeah.
And then there's just steps to actually do the conversion, and I'll walk through a live conversion here. I should have done that first so I could maybe get it done by the time the workshop is over. And then doing the conversion, how to tell what didn't transfer, and steps if they didn't, and if you needed help, what options that you might have. I wanted to walk through the process here. So let me share my other screen here. Because one of the big things is, especially now, with people doing a lot of migrations or doing a lot of QuickBooks consulting in the cloud using QuickBooks Online, a lot of people might be using Macs or just solely using QuickBooks Online. And in order to move from desktop to online, you need access to QuickBooks Desktop in some way, right? And you can't do it on a Mac, right? Like you can't download QuickBooks for Mac, get your client's file and use QuickBooks for Mac to convert that file. So QuickBooks at least understands that and gives you access to a QuickBooks online tool, right? So here in this article for moving QuickBooks Desktop to online, there is a web migration tool, and this gives you access to an instance of QuickBooks Pro or Premier or QuickBooks Enterprise or QuickBooks Mac to be able to, if you have those files and you're not going to do anything in the desktop to clean them up first, solely all you need is the ability to have QuickBooks to be able to move things over. Then you have these links in here to be able to do that. And it's just an online instance with QuickBooks in it for the sole purpose of uploading a file to bring it to QuickBooks Online. So let's go into QuickBooks Desktop here. Now I've just got a sample company here open, and in order to do this, I'm using the QuickBooks Enterprise, so there is a kind of a secret code to get this process started, because normally you would go to the company menu, and then at the bottom of the company menu there will be an option to export to QuickBooks Online. Enterprise doesn't have that. So you have to bring up the product information window first, and incidentally, this is where we're talking about targets.
You can
it's right
see
there
that there.
Yeah.
Very
so
cool.
in this particular file there's 5,937 targets, which equates to 1,219 transactions in this particular company file.
Yeah.
The keyboard shortcut is holding the control key, pressing B then Q at the same time, and then clicking OK. And that brings up this process. Now, this is something that I noticed earlier about getting your desktop data, company data ready for migration. There's a checklist right here on this screen. When we open it up, and it spins for a while, it gives some pretty good options here. Double check your list of active customers, because that's going to play a part in what happens with those transactions over into QuickBooks. Doing the same thing for vendors, doing the same things for accounts, categorizing and reconciling your transactions. And then it has a section for payroll. Make sure that the employee profile is complete. This is huge for the transition of payroll, because after your data comes over, the financial data, then it tries to set up payroll. And if anything derails the setting up of payroll for you, then it just stops. And then you have to take that baton and pass it over.
Yeah, and I can't deal with a derailed payroll. I hate it when payroll derails.
Right.
I have to say, I love this checklist. Even I can do this.
Right. When I saw it a couple times, I'm like, what's that all about? And so I actually started checking it out. I was like, actually, it's pretty cool. Backing up your data is some of the other things to do, and then run the verify tool to make sure that the data is clean before you move it over, because this is all going to result in a case of garbage in, garbage out, right? So if there's damaged transactions, the damage could potentially make the journey, right? Or it could just stop the transfer of data altogether. So let's go back here and get this started.
Now, is this the
So
tool that you usually always use, Dan?
I typically will use just an instance of QuickBooks Desktop, right? So I
Mhm.
am in the company file. If I'm not using the online tool here for this workshop, I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that online tool existed. So
Okay.
the first thing is to just get started, and then it's going to ask you, would you bring all of your data or lists and balances, right? So right from the top, if you even if you're bringing over nothing except just the lists and the transactions, you know that there's lots to clean up, or we just want to pick up the baton, and there's so much information in there that you don't necessarily want to burden QuickBooks Online with that. You could choose just to bring over lists and balances only. We're going to choose all versions now. And then we talked about bringing over inventory. You can choose to track inventory using FIFO or not to choose. Uh, don't move them over. If you choose not to move inventory, the items still come over. They're just non-inventory parts
Non-inventory.
as opposed
Now,
to
what if you do
inventory.
choose yes,
Mm-hmm.
and you have both assembly items and finished goods in desktop? How will it bring it over to QBO?
Yeah, so every item, and that's where those that resources comes in handy. Every item, assembly item, and regular inventory items will just be made as inventory parts.
Inventory. Okay.
So
Yeah.
historical transactions, the financial impact of items that were assembled will come over properly. They won't look like they did in QuickBooks Desktop,
Right.
because in order to account for that, it will have to modify that transaction so that it puts the individual components on the invoices that as they were sold. So that makes things look a lot differently with regards to assemblies, because as we know, in the cat QuickBooks Online, there is no such thing as an inventory assembly. So
Right.
all of those items, they'll get set up as regular inventory parts, and historical transactions will come over as, and the financial impact of those transactions should make the journey.
Yeah.
It's just the other moving forward after you've made that transition, it's not going to have the assembly items and the
They're
build
all just
assembly
the same.
process and all of those things as you'd had before.
Yeah. There's no differential between them. They're all just regular inventory items.
Exactly. So then that raises the question, and typically when you have that sort of type of information, I can't spell and I can't type and talk at the same time. But let's see here. Let me at least get this going here. So when you have the issue, well, now it's asking for all this stuff. Let me get a code, which is over here. 244. Let's just throw that in there. So those inventory assembly items, they come over as just regular inventory parts. But this conversation is something that you would have with your client as soon as they say they have assemblies, right? What's the plan for that? Because knowing what's going to happen when it comes over, then it becomes a matter of there may be some other things that you might need in there, right? So let's find a conversion demo trial that I made. Typically, I like to make trials, and this is part of my best practice here of the way I go about this. I'll create a trial subscription within my QuickBooks Online accountant, and that will then give me the access as the accountant user and the primary admin. It's just a trial. Then I can invite the client to those companies, and they can poke around, see how well the data came over, see if their workflows transition. I let them do that because, again, I don't know what their workflows are, and the time and discovery of being able to do that. A lot of people don't necessarily see the value in doing that until it's too late. So I shift that burden to them.
Yeah.
Have them go through with their team. I set them up as all access, but not an admin, because I don't want them to start using this as their fully functioning QuickBooks Online subscription. They may already have another one, or we may want to, this process may take months, and we want to make sure they're in the right version at the right time.
Yeah, your process is incredible. I'm really impressed.
Thank you. Now you know what I'm doing in the back end here.
Yeah.
And this is new. They used to have a screen here that had 3 lines on it. And once it's uploaded, what would happen, it would say, all right, we got it from here. This has changed so that this status bar it's one status bar, right? And it tells you, and I don't know if you just missed it, right? While it's uploading, it will say, keep this window open. And then once it's uploaded, it's now saying, it's still got the status bar, but it says your QuickBooks Desktop Data will continue to migrate to QuickBooks Online even if you close this window. So in the past, this was okay, I got it. We got it from here. But if you want, you can actually now see an estimated time of how long it's going to take for that data to actually,
that's really cool,
be finished, right? So it gives you an idea. Even though it says 3%, it's going to take 22 minutes. So we're not going to wait 22 minutes.
22 minutes for a seamless switch. That's what it says.
Said it again. So that's the new process of moving it from inside of QuickBooks. It's the same general process of what we had in there before. There's just some new screens. The checklist was one thing, and the status bar is another up until this point. Now, inside of our course, we have some resources that are still available with Intuit or with inside of QuickBooks. It's just finding them, right? So in here we have a post desktop migration checklist, which is available outside of at Intuit, but again, trying to find it is part of the challenge. So we have it here in our downloads and resources page on School of Bookkeeping. When you go and download it, this spreadsheet is really cool. I'm going to move this over, and then whoop, there we go. So it created a spreadsheet, right, which has just got some instructions on one tab of the client profile as far as their name, address, primary contact information. This is typically something that you might do during the discovery process of getting the details, right? Any notes or anything like that. And then what to do with pre and post, right? So your verify data and setup, check and make sure that the balance sheets, actually this is post conversion. So you want to make sure that the balance sheets for all dates and all on accrual basis, they match, right? And then you can just mark these as completed or whether or not they're work in progress. And it just goes down the list of things to check, right? And then workflows and assignments is really cool too, because you have who is supposed to do what, right? So this will help you in that process of assigning who's going to do what. Is the feature even in use, right? So this is customer invoices. Is the feature in use? You could say it's in use, and then who's going to train it, or whether or not it's training is required or not, and then who is going to be assigned to, right? And then they also have a little checkbox here of, well, helping people decide if they need essentials or plus or advanced, right? If they're using this purchase orders, right? If that's in use, then they at least need plus, right? Because it's listed here. So it's a pretty cool option for somebody who's working with their client to make sure that they have all their bases covered.
Yeah.
And making a game plan between you and the client of who's going to do what.
Keeps
So
you
this
organized.
is a really, really cool checklist and spreadsheet
Yes.
that Intuit's made available for accountants. So that's available in the School of Bookkeeping. I just collected it for you and put that in a resource for you as well. Oops. Go to the right place. Now, once this one here is this lesson here is really great about how do you tell what came over and what didn't, right? So as the primary accountant, and that's the first accountant to be listed on the file, right? So if you were the second accountant in the mix, the first accountant is going to get this import summary report that gets emailed automatically, right? So when you get one, whoops, no, we don't want that. Where is, I've got too many things shared and showing. Once it's done, and looking at the other file, we got 17 minutes, so I'm not going to wait 17 minutes. There is a spreadsheet that's provided that has an overview of the file and gives some pertinent information about the file, whether inventory was turned on or whether you're using payroll, a lot of those things that you would have to go through the file. But then it's got a summary of customers, vendors, transactions, form templates, all those things. Then it will tell you, here's what we counted in desktop, and here's what we counted in QuickBooks Online, and there's a column for the difference.
Oh, very cool.
And it'll also give you a link to look at what that difference, why that difference is showing.
You can see where it's coming from.
Exactly. That's why I take this approach, because that import summary is so helpful in identifying the stragglers.
Yeah. Because you don't want to be told error and then what is it? You know?
Yeah. And it will typically tell you why there was a problem. So that takes a lot of the detective work out of the mix to let you know, okay, I can't create this item because you mapped the wrong account, right? Or something like that. So now I have some things to do and a list of who to look at, right? So here's a listing of these items. They have improper accounts associated with them. So I had one where they had done some creative contra accounting and they had set up items where the income and the expense were income accounts for both. but they showed up in the same grouping
Yeah.
so that they could collapse them at the top of their profit and loss report, which is fine. And you can do that in QuickBooks Online, but you can't transition an item in that state into QuickBooks Online. So that's now a conversation of, okay, we can fix it in desktop so that they get created, but we're going to then have to go back into those same items and put them back the way you want them,
Yeah.
if that's the way you want them. So that would have been a lot of detective work and legwork to come up with, okay, here's the scope, right? You've got 42 items. In this case, I would have had to do it individually, try to find it. Here it's all just itemized for you in that import summary report. Really cool method and resource that Intuit makes to help you in some of this detective work, rather than you putting on your Sherlock Holmes cap and trying to comb through and look for clues yourself. Right? Now, sometimes you don't want to do any of this stuff, right? A lot of people just want to be hands off. Maybe they started with QuickBooks Online and never touched desktop. So we have a couple resources available for you as well at School of Bookkeeping to be able to help you. So one thing is, whoops, you don't want to do that. We have on our tools and resources page at the top of QuickBooks or School of Bookkeeping, we have a data conversion guide. And really what this is a self-guided adventure to allow you to work through this whole process of converting and making sure that this data will convert. There's other options in here. If you're coming from Sage, for example, or NetSuite, and you want to get to QuickBooks Online, we have some resources in here too. But if you're just converting from desktop to online, this resource here will ask you the questions to at least give you an idea that, yes, this file will come over, or maybe it won't. If they're using Payroll, here's some things to look at. And then you can choose, okay, the course might help me out. I'm fine with the course, or maybe I need some guided assistance. And that's just a way to work through some of those questions that you might not even know that you needed to ask. But you'll also be able to work with us there if you have any follow-up questions about your project. And then lastly, at School of Bookkeeping, we are bundling School of Bookkeeping with QuickBooks Online. And because QuickBooks is making it so enticing to move to QuickBooks Online, if you bundle our elite version of School of Bookkeeping, which includes the quick answer chat resource, we will move your data for you if you purchase a subscription through us.
Oh,
right?
very cool.
And that's just getting the data, moving it over, and providing you with the results as far as the import summary is concerned, and helping you make that game plan. So with quick answers, you'll be able to ask some quick questions. You'll have access to all of our tutorials and video resources on how do I do these things to help create that, or help with your transition post-conversion game plan and training plan.
That's so helpful, because it's not always, you don't just go into QuickBooks Online and know how to use all the things. Sometimes you need help.
Yeah. And like, where did this go, or why didn't this come over? That's a question that you can ask in quick answers, and we can help determine why that is. Or I had 10 shipping addresses for my customer. Why didn't they come over? They don't. Right? There is no such thing as multiple shipping addresses in QuickBooks Online. So got to have some place to go in order to know, in order to put it there. So that is all of the resources in a nutshell. We still have 10 minutes, so I'm not going to wait 10 minutes because we're already over our allotted time.
We'll
So,
just assume it came over seamlessly.
yeah, we'll give you an update next week when we talk about that. Any thoughts? Some thoughts on this, Rachel?
No, it's great. I love it. I'm one of those people where I like to rely on the experts migrating my data for me.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could be. It's a challenge, right? And I certainly would love to have been involved with the companies from the get-go, so I would know, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that are surprises, right? And
Yes.
you could ask all of those questions on the spreadsheet, and they will still never tell you that they put Citibank vendor as their
Right.
tax
Yeah.
vendor, right? So
Exactly. Well,
not
and then
like
I
that's
mean,
happened.
but you have so many incredible resources in the School of Bookkeeping that one could do it on their own, and it's great.
Yeah, and if you have questions, you can ask on the specific lesson for clarity, or give us feedback. So, hey, this is old, and we can do another workshop to make sure we're updated. And that's what we're going to do, is we're going to repurpose the topics that we've covered here and re-update them into those lessons so that we keep it accurate. So we appreciate you joining us here today on another workshop. And as always, we'll see you next week, and hope you have a great day. And that wraps up another insightful episode of Workshop Wednesday, brought to you by Schoolofbookkeeping.com. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion and took away some valuable tips and strategies to enhance your bookkeeping practice. Remember, if you want to stay ahead in the world of bookkeeping and accounting, be sure to visit Schoolofbookkeeping.com. With a wide range of courses, resources, and expert guidance, you'll find everything you need to sharpen your skills and boost your career. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. Your reviews help us reach more listeners and continue to bring you the best content every week. If you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, reach out to us on social media or send us an email at support@schoolofbookkeeping.com. We love hearing from our listeners and are always looking for new ideas to explore. Thanks for tuning in to Workshop Wednesday. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep excelling in your bookkeeping journey. I'm Dan DeLong, and we'll see you next week.